Big congrats to Yannik Sinner for winning the US Open. He now has 2 Grand Slam titles. And today I'd like to break down a couple of things about his forehand after going through some recent footage that I think are really interesting, things that all of us can copy no matter what our level is. You don't have to be a world-class athlete to take advantage of these things. And the first thing I want you to take a look at with this footage as he's practicing here, and just for context, this is warm-up. He's just hitting down the middle with a practice partner. And I want you to look at how many of these forehand swings he physically steps forwards into the shot. In a kind of modern tennis methodology, a lot has been made of the open stance, and the open stance is critically important to have in your arsenal, a tool that's really important to have in your toolbox. But it's interesting to look at how many elite world-class players, when it's up to them, like in this situation with a practice partner, and they're just hitting down the middle, and he's not under any stress, and he could easily use any stance he wants on any of these shots. It's really interesting to me to see how many he's actually stepping forward and even across on some of these in a slightly closed stance, even though this is just a cooperative rally back and forth. So long story short, you need to have options. Closed stance is important. Neutral stance, just stepping forward, is important. Open stance is important. But a, air quotes, like next-gen player like this, you would kind of assume on paper would be hitting like exclusively open stance. And some of these are, like I would count this a semi-open stance. Yes, he's stepping forwards, but he's not quite at 90 degrees, which, in my mind is the definition of a square stance or like stepping forwards. So on, I don't know, probably a third or a quarter of these swings, he's at semi-open stance. And the rest of them, he's some variation of square stance or closed stance. So yes, open stance is super, super important, but don't feel like you have to hit every forehand open stance if you want to be a modern tennis player or be able to hit topspin or anything like that. Now, when you watch him in real life and he's being stressed by opponents, he uses every possible type of stance and position because his opponents are putting him under stress and duress. And so doesn't have the option of stepping into every forehand. You should build a well-rounded toolkit in terms of your footwork and your different stances, just like he does. But isn't it interesting that when he has the option, he's stepping in a lot in a more traditional kind of pattern. All right, number two. The first person I really took note of this next one was Novak Djokovic. Look at how far he wraps around his follow-through, meaning like a lot of tennis players are trying to finish over the shoulder. So if you're a right-handed player, going to finish with the racket up over your opposite shoulder. He goes another 90 degrees in terms of like rotational energy past that point. So just finishing with your hand, your racket over your shoulder, will have your butt cap pointing towards your target, towards the other side of the court. And Yannik, on most of these, his butt cap is actually pointing to the left, a full 90 degrees further around his body, with the butt cap pointing towards the side fence. This creates a super long rotational swing through the point of contact. And it's not just the amount of rotation, which is important. Look at how his chest starts facing towards the camera. He makes contact facing forwards towards his target. And then his rotation doesn't stop there. It continues through. And as his arm and his racket's momentum continues to carry around, his body keeps turning and his chest finishes facing towards the side fence. So in total, his chest is going through a full 180-degree turn, full half circle, which if you struggle with power, if you struggle with generating force without feeling like you're really muscling against the ball, this is the first thing I would recommend you take a look at, is specifically how much rotation of body is happening in your forehand, and also when is it happening. If most of your turn isn't happening until after contact, then it's not really contributing much to the force that you're putting through the point of contact. Yannik here, half of his rotation is taking place before the ball touches his racket, and that's really the primary engine or force that's being used to generate the power and the spin that he's creating in each of these shots. But the wraparound finish indicates a lot of looseness and relaxation of his arm and his hand through the point of contact. And it also is due to the continuation of the rotation of his body after the point of contact and after his arm and his racket has gone through and released. Everything keeps turning. He's just allowing that circular force and energy to continue happening instead of stopping it, instead of being tight and tense, which virtually all of us are tighter and more tense than we need to be or what we ideally should be, in my opinion. And seeing a big, long swing and range of motion with both the body and the hand and the racket, to me, is kind of a hallmark of a high-level player. Okay, number 3, this one I've been working on a lot with my students recently. I'm going to show you a couple different swings here. Some of these swings are up above Yannick's strike zone. Some are below his strike zone. But on all of them, he makes contact with his body facing forwards, meaning he has unwound. So here's a low contact shot. And just like the previous shot that we looked at, which is like chest height, on this one where he's going to make contact, I think around knee height, a little bit below knee height, he's still starting with his chest facing the camera. He's still facing the net as he makes contact, even though this is down outside his strike zone. And his swing is still long and loose and relaxed, and he's still finishing all the way around his body with his arm and his hand, even though it's outside of his strike zone. And for most normal tennis players, myself included, the more the ball is a little bit stressful, a little bit uncomfortable. That could be because it's high, it could be because it's low, it could be because we're having to run a long ways to the right or to the left. The more those stressors come into the equation, generally, the less good of a job we do of actually utilizing our full kinetic chain. And the more outside our comfort zone the ball tends to be, unfortunately, the more we tend to rely on our arm, which added to the complication of the ball being a little bit wide or a little bit high or a little bit low, now we've got layers and layers of stress. We have layers of challenge in a situation where we need to remove challenges. Like, it's hard enough having to run way to the right, way to the left, reach up high, reach down low. But if on top of that, you're not unwinding your body at the appropriate time and the appropriate order, now it's, the odds of hitting a good shot just nosedive and dramatically decrease. So there's a high contact point coming up. Yeah, here we go. So here's a shot at shoulder height. So tennis players frequently struggle down at knee height. They frequently struggle up at shoulder height. And even though this is up out of his strike zone, not that he's not comfortable at shoulder height, but it's just not in ideal position, between like chest and knee heights, he's still unwinding, and that's what gives him the force to be able to still hit a solid shot. So it really doesn't matter where in the strike zone the ball is landing. He's making sure to use his full kinetic chain on every ball, every swing, whenever it's possible. When you watch him in real life against Taylor Fritz, and Fritz is going, for a winner, and Yannik is getting stretched out, eventually things will break down. And you will absolutely find slow motion footage of all the elite players not using their full kinetic chain, but it's at the very outer edges, the very fringes of their spectrum of challenge where things finally start to break down. Whereas normal everyday players like us, it only takes like 5% challenge or like 10% challenge in terms of heights or width or depth or speed or whatever it is that makes us a little uncomfortable, and our mechanics start to break down. And in a nutshell, if you want to continue to develop and advance your game, the name of the game is unwinding your body and using your full kinetic chain throughout more and more and more and more range of challenge, more and more range of stress and discomfort. If the more stress and discomfort you're under because your opponent hits a good shot, you're still able to use good quality fundamentals and use the kinetic chain, your level will increase. The quality of shot you're able to stay comfortable against and actually send back a competitive ball and be able to beat your opponents will go higher and higher and higher if your fundamentals remain solid, even under stress and duress. So those 3 things really jumping out to me from Yannik. Again, big congrats to him for winning the US Open. Hope this was helpful to you. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again next time.